Okay, I think we'll get started. So Annette is doing all the lovely techie support stuff there, letting people in as they come in. The session is recorded today, and if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box as we go through, and then we'll have a look at them at the end. And Annette will be checking up on those as we go through the session. So welcome to today's session, where we're going to be looking at reasonable adjustments and looking at what they are and what you can do with them. Just seeing that somebody said that they can't hear. Hopefully that will be able to help you with that. So this is the last in the series of 3 sessions that we are doing. And I don't know if you've all been to the other 2, but the recordings for those are on our website. If you, no, they're not. They were sent out to people who had been at the last ones. So today's the last one, and it's looking at reasonable adjustments. And when you are meeting with carers who are autistic themselves, whether they are caring for an autistic child, whether they are caring for their parents, for a relative, it's always having to remember about the needs of the carer as well as the person that they care for. So we're going to start looking at this, but first of all, I'm just going to play you a video, which I'm sorry about this. I'm just going to stop sharing to make sure I've got the audio on. So there was a change to these in December. So this is the newest version of this. So it's just for about 6 minutes. So I will play this. Sorry. Please play.
The Care Act 2014 is the most significant piece of legislation in our sector since the establishment of the welfare state. It builds upon a patchwork of legislation built up since the 1948 National Assistance Act. The Act begins by defining the primary legal responsibility of local authorities as the promotion of individual well-being. There is a shift from the duty to provide services to meeting eligible needs, from being eligible for services to having eligible needs or qualifying for care and support. Of course, everyone is unique, so local authorities can't comply with the Act by providing one size fits all. They must put the person at the centre of their offer and have a conversation about the best way to meet their eligible needs. They should reach out to a wide range of care and support options. A key part of the Act is a focus on preventing or delaying needs and therefore the need for care and support. This might mean investing in preventative services and making full use of any existing community resources, facilities and assets to prevent, reduce or delay people's needs and maximise their independence. Carers, who are people who provide unpaid necessary support, often a family member or friend, are given significant entitlements under the Act. I hope that they'll be supported to maintain their caring role for longer. Local authorities must establish and maintain an information and advice service. They must provide this to everyone in the area, not just people who have eligible needs. The service should cover the rights and entitlements that people have under the Act and how they can access them in their local area. This should include financial advice. Information should be provided in accessible ways, not just on a website or leaflets in a GP's office, but tailored to the needs of local people. Local authorities must facilitate a diverse, vibrant and sustainable market for care and support services that benefit the whole population. Good commissioning, as outlined in the Act and guidance, should follow some key principles. It should focus on individual well-being, workforce development, pay and appropriate pricing of services. It should support sustainability and ensure choice. This should be done through strategic planning, supporting providers and good contracting mechanisms co-produced with local people who have experience of social care. The Act requires local authorities to promote integration, cooperation, and partnership with the NHS and other key partners. This includes working through local health and wellbeing boards. The Act aims to put people at the centre of their care and support and maximise their involvement in any process and decision. Some people find it very difficult to play a full part in social care processes and don't have someone appropriate to support them. If this is the case, the local authority must arrange for an independent advocate to support their involvement in assessment, planning, appeals, or safeguarding. Needs or carers assessments must be carried out where there appears to be a need for care and support, regardless of potential eligibility of needs. The assessment should be appropriate, proportionate to the individual circumstances of the adult or carer, person-centred, strengths-based, and ensure a focus on the duty to promote individual well-being. The Act establishes a national minimum threshold at which people have eligible needs or will be eligible for care and support. The determination of eligibility consists of 3 conditions that the practitioner must work through in turn to establish if the adult or carer meets the eligibility criteria and therefore has eligible needs. As part of these criteria, the Act provides a set of eligible outcomes. Once the assessment and eligibility process is complete, there's a duty on local authorities to produce care and support plans and to offer a personal budget if the person has eligible needs. This should focus on keeping people directly involved. The Act also sets out a duty to review care and support plans to ensure that they continue to meet the needs of the person. Local authorities have the duty to provide a deferred payment scheme, assisting people with payment if they go into a care home. Adult safeguarding is, for the first time, spelled out in law in the Care Act. Local authorities must make inquiries if they believe an adult is or is at risk of being abused or neglected. They must also set up a Safeguarding Adults Board, including key stakeholders. This board will carry out Safeguarding Adults reviews when people die as a result of neglect or abuse, and there's a concern that the local authority or its partners could have done more. The Social Care Institute for Excellence continues working closely with central and local government to produce useful resources that will enable local authorities to further improve social care practice in alignment with the legislative requirements and good practice. For more information, visit the Skye website at www.skye.org.uk.
Okay, so that is just the link is there for you to look at a later date and to pass on to colleagues, but it was just an update, which I thought was a good way to start this session off. So we're going to be looking at what reasonable adjustments are, and under the Equality Act 2010, public sector organisations have to make changes in their approach and provision to make sure that the services are accessible to disabled people as well as everyone else. And it's very easy to remember this when you are looking at the care for person, but it's also looking at the care. And when somebody is autistic, it is looking at the needs of that autistic carer to make sure that they are covered as well. And sometimes it might impede on how they can look after the person that they're looking after, and they actually need some support in as well to help them with that. So reasonable adjustments can mean alterations to buildings. So like for people who've got physical disabilities, you would obviously think of big things, big reasonable adjustments that are needed to help somebody with access. But it can also mean changes to policies and procedures, making sure that staff are trained so that they can understand the people that they're working with. But it can also be small things as well, just how you greet somebody, how you speak to somebody. And so when we're talking about how you can make reasonable adjustments for autistic carers, it is looking at what autism is, what are the needs that autism brings to it, and how you can look at those reasonable adjustments. So for some people, it might be that they just need clear, simple, repeated explanation of what's happening. And then how do you follow up with that? It might be that what they are listening to when they are talking to you, as soon as they walk out the room, they can't remember it. Or it could be that because you're giving them too much information at one time, that they can't remember anything from the first thing, and they actually start getting really anxious and their anxiety levels peak and they can't remember anything. They might need help with their appointments. It might be that the appointments need to be at a different time. It might be that they need a follow-up from a verbal appointment over the phone to an email or a text to make sure that they do have the details for when they're processing the information, that they can see it later on. And they might need help with managing issues of consent. So that's looking at the Mental Capacity Act. So I think the bottom bit of this is quite key, is that public sector organisations shouldn't simply wait and respond to difficulties, but the duty on them is to be anticipatory. So it's meaning that you've got to sort of think about this in advance. And obviously the best way to think of it in advance is actually knowing the needs of the person who you are going to be visiting with, working with, to see what their needs are. Maybe before you go to meet them, that you can have a list of what their needs are. So one of the things that you can look at is the environment. So if somebody is coming to see you within a public building, so here I've just got two examples of like hospital reception areas, but this could be anywhere. So if you start looking at the one on the top left, it's obviously very, very colourful and it's very new, but you can see how bright all those lights are shining. And I think if you look at the underneath where it says reception here, you've got lights coming down. If this area here is shiny, it's going to reflect those lights back up. So for somebody who's got a sensory need in the visual area, they could find that really difficult to navigate, and actually they might get blocked here from going past. So a reasonable adjustment there could be that there is another way past here, or is there a way of dimming those lights, or even just putting something over here so it's not shining. I did an audit of a school once where they had downlights coming down into the corridors that were really bright, but for some reason part of the corridor flooring they'd actually painted with gloss paint. I don't know why, but it really shone the light back up again, so you were getting blinded from the floor, and that had made a difficulty for some of the students there, but they hadn't realised why the students were having a difficulty until that was brought out. So it is looking at what the lighting is, and obviously within any given day you can only do some reasonable adjustments practically, but if you see that there is a commonality of where there are some things that are causing distress to a lot of people coming through, when there's going to be a refurb, that is when you would look at the bigger picture of what can be changed, that is actually not just an unreasonable adjustment, but actually it might be something that is causing an issue for more than those people that you were looking at the reasonable adjustments for. It also could be staying on the same picture of all the different colours coinciding with each other, and maybe having all the yellow chairs together and all the blue chairs together might work better. But it's just looking at the environment, walking through as to what could be difficulties. And for an environment, it's often looking at the sensory side of things, but from a sensory perspective, could be things that could cause issues. And if you have done a look at where you work to see what issues there could be, then when you are looking through the notes of someone and they may be hypersensitive to sound, you might straight away think, oh, actually, this bit here then could cause an issue. How can we do something with that? If you look at this bottom picture here, so you're coming in, there are two people here. For the autistic carer, they might find it really difficult to walk up to somebody, and they are behind a desk in this picture. So they might find it difficult to walk up to them to ask where to go. And you can see within this picture that there are quite a few different doorways. And so they may have been told that they walk into the reception area and you go to see who you're going to see through one of the doors. How do they know which door to do? And if they're not able to walk up to these two people that are behind a desk, so it could be a reasonable adjustment there would be for one of the receptionists to come out from the desk and actually ask if they need some help. It's also the writing at the top. This, I've obviously taken this from a foreign hospital, which I've done on purpose, because it's looking at writing. What does writing mean? And I'm just going to go on to this next slide. You know, what does that mean? For some of you, you might be able to read this. And if you can, I'm hoping that Google Translate is actually working, because the next bit is from Google Translate. So hopefully that is what that says. But you wouldn't know that unless you could speak that language. And for somebody who is autistic, if they are taking the person that they're caring for to an appointment, to visit somebody outside their normal routine, it can cause anxiety. Then they have to read signage, and if the signage isn't clear, then that can make it quite difficult. And also, a lot of autistic people are literal as well. And so literally they could take things in a different way. So it's making sure that what you have written up actually means what it says, and it is clear. And it is clear for an autistic person to be able to read. If it's clear for an autistic person to read, it will be clear for an awful lot more people to read as well. So I'm just going to give you another example of how, when something is written, how it can be confusing and what you could do to make it clearer. So here we have some information, and I'm not asking you to read it all through because it is just used as an example. That is a lot of words there that could jumble up with each other. However, if you break it out into paragraphs, does that not make it a lot more clearer to read, that you can actually see what is being said? And for somebody who is autistic, who needs to process one thing at a time, they can read one paragraph at a time, process that information, and then move on to the next one. So when you are giving information out, make sure that you have broken it up. So if, for example, you've done an assessment meeting and you've taken some notes and you're going to follow that up with an email, you would make sure that you are breaking it up into probably smaller chunks than you would normally, so that you're keeping each bit of information separate. And so somebody can read something, process it, then move on to the next bit, rather than maybe having to read half a paragraph and forgetting where they've got to when they go back to read the next half of the paragraph. So that is just an example. And I'm just going to go back to the slide before, because that is the same wording, exactly the same information as that is, but what a difference it makes when it is laid out in an easier to read format. You do get easy read format as well. And for some autistic people, they do not need easy read. They just need it broken up into easier to read chunks of information. So I hope that makes sense. And before I carry on, I'm just thinking that one comment that was made at the beginning was about learning about things that are not reasonable adjustments, I think you said. What reasonable adjustments are getting things onto a level playing field. It's not making it so that somebody who's got a disability is more advantageous. It's making sure that the reasonable adjustment is getting them up to the level of everybody else, not making them like front of the queue. It's making them at a normal level. One example of what would not be a reasonable adjustment is if somebody had a bedroom and they were moving into supported living or to somewhere, and they said, well, actually, I don't like the colour of that room, I'd like it changed to pink. That's a personal preference. That is not making a reasonable adjustment. So I hope you can understand the difference of just that bit. So moving on. So if reasonable adjustments aren't made, we're now going to go through a lot of things that have been brought to our attention by autistic adults as to how difficult it can be when reasonable adjustments aren't made. So the first one here is that people in hospital didn't know what my sunflower lanyard meant. They just kept commenting on how pretty it was. Now, a lot of people will use this, the lanyards, but the lanyards are only useful if the people that they're wearing it through actually know what it stands for. And I know I saw somebody with one on who was serving in a shop one day, and I was like, are you wearing that because you need it or because you just actually like the pretty colours of it? Hopefully they are only used by those who need other people to know that they've got an additional need and that they might need some help at some point in time. So it's making sure that if somebody is wearing one of those, that the team that they're meeting actually know what it actually stands for. Written communication can sometimes be easier, and we've heard from autistic adults where they say, like, well, actually phone calls is really hard. Can you text me? Can you email me instead? That they find just being on the phone too difficult. So sometimes it can be that texting, and obviously texting can take a lot longer than verbal ability, but usually it can be where they can process the information more. If it's written down, they can keep going back over it if they need to as many times so they can process that information. And obviously, if somebody is going to be talking to you about something that is really quite a difficult subject, then their anxiety is going to be raised. Therefore, they're going to find it harder to process the information at that time. So written communication can sometimes be easier, but it's actually finding out from each individual what their preference is. For those who can do phone calls, there you go, you can do phone calls. However, they probably would also like a follow-up of it written so that, again, they can go over it and process it and remember what that information is. I'm just thinking of an example of where if you have somebody who's going in to see a doctor about cancer, where they're going to get the results of some tests, they're often asked to bring a family member with them. This is not somebody with a disability, but just because they're going to be given information that is really serious, and they know that the person they're giving that information to, that it's about them, once they hear it, they're probably not going to take in anything else that is said in that session. Therefore, taking somebody with them, the other person might remember it all. So that is where stress has really hit somebody, and anxiety of hearing that bad news. But that's what it can be like for an autistic person with news that is not that critical. It's just that they find it hard to process. And also bearing in mind with sensory input as well, as to where they might be distracted from sensory things. And so having it written down can help them with this. Another one here, a couple of people said they've lied to seem better than they are to get out of hospital quicker because they found the experience so challenging. So sometimes, again, from a sensory perspective, I know I keep talking about sensory quite a bit, but it does impact a lot. But if they're finding that the staff that are there are not understanding their needs, not making any of the reasonable adjustments, like maybe they need the curtains around the bed all the time to shut out everybody else in a hospital ward. If that isn't being done and they're left open, then everything that's going on might be so hurtful to them that actually they feel as if they need to get out quicker. So when somebody comes around and says, so how are you feeling now? They might just go, yeah, I'm fine, just to get out. So it's remembering and looking at how somebody is, not taking word value in this scenario, but actually to see if there are other issues as to why somebody has suddenly changed from how they've been maybe 2 hours previous, but it's because their anxiety levels are increasing so much they just need to be out. And we've heard of people where within a hospital situation that they prefer to be in a room on their own, because that is easier, to another person saying, well, actually, I prefer to be in the ward because I prefer to be around other people and see what's going on rather than hearing the noises that I can't see why those noises are happening. So it's very different for different people. Why does a receptionist need to know the problem? Have you been into the doctor's waiting room? The receptionist asks you why you want to see the doctor, and all the waiting room can hear what is being said. So for the autistic person, they find this really, really hard, and it can be really embarrassing. So maybe a reasonable adjustment in this scenario would be to maybe take the person to one side, even maybe outside the building, to talk to them, or have them write it down so they can pass it over that way. But it's knowing what works for different people. And again, with the GP surgery, during lockdown, we weren't allowed inside the surgery to wait. The GP was coming out into the car park to say who was next, and then you went in. For somebody who is autistic, that would be a reasonable adjustment. If they could not wait in the waiting room, would maybe be that they had to wait outside and the GP or receptionist had to come out to get them when it was their turn to go in to see them. Moving on to a few more here. So one person said that they feel sorry for health providers who don't seem equipped to support autism. If you don't understand autism, if you have not been in any autism training courses, how are you going to understand the needs of an autistic person? And so, you know, it's just helpful if you've actually been on some training, start to understand autism so that it helps you to understand the perspective of where an autistic person is coming from. And having a doctor, you know, is crucial, having the same person. So with social care, have the same social worker each time. And I know that social care teams move around quite a bit, but actually that could be a reasonable adjustment, is that you have somebody assigned, and unless of course they're on holiday or sick, that is the person who is going to carry on seeing that, not just the carer, but also the cared for person. So there's continuity through, and that will take some of the anxiety away of meeting somebody new and having to explain everything again of what all their needs are. Alison was admitted to A&E for asthma, really bright lights, loud alarms and noises. She asked to turn some of the lights off to try and help, which they did, but then other nurses turned them back on again. So there was a reasonable adjustment made there of where these lights were turned off to help her. But obviously there wasn't any communication then between staff to make sure that the other nurses knew why this had happened. And then they turned them back on again, and then the problem was there. Hospital experience, meeting so many new faces and handovers not properly explained. So the reasonable adjustment in that case would be that somebody explains to them from the start what is going to happen. So from walking into a hospital, is that when it starts or is it before? When somebody is given an appointment, how do you know where you're going in the hospital? Having a plan sent to you of a map of the hospital, clearly describing how to get somewhere. I was at a meeting in a hospital near to us a couple of weeks ago that I'd not been to before, and it was quite a convoluted journey to the meeting room we were going to. I had some fantastic instructions given to me to find this room. I'm not autistic, I don't have any additional needs, but without those clear instructions, I would have found it really hard to have found this place. But that made the difference of me getting there on time to me having to ask endless people along the way of how to get to where I was going to, because the signage wasn't that clear. Invasive treatments not explained or talked through, where people just assume that people know what is going to happen, when actually for an autistic person, especially where it says invasive treatment, so something's going to be happening to them, they're going to feel that very differently to somebody who is neurotypical. So it's having things explained, and it could be that the treatments for the cared for person are not being talked about clearly enough. And so the autistic carer, when they are trying to talk with the cared for person, they need to know what is going to be happening in a way that they can actually then explain it to the person that they're caring for as well. I struggle with, I will call you back at some point today. It's unpredictable. I'm not prepared. You need to, for an autistic person, predictability is a key thing. And so if you have been talking to them and then say, well, actually, I will call you back on this, give them a time frame. So it might be that I will call you back between 3 and 3:30, and then at least they've got some time frame that, and they might sit around from 3 o'clock next to the phone, waiting for that phone to ring. When I will call you back at some point today, obviously that is whenever. And that can just be a really anxious person, because they might not then do anything else that day, just waiting for that phone to ring and being very concerned that they might miss the call if they go and do something. So they will be on edge all day. And if you then don't ring them till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're probably going to get a really, really highly anxious person answering the phone, where their processing isn't working as well. And it could be then a failure of a phone call. So again, that reasonable adjustment would be given some more definitive information that will help them. And try not to make assumptions. So this was from a person that we've been talking to recently who lives near to us. And so the autistic carer said that his partner was really mentally unwell, but nobody checked in with the autistic carer, John, to see that he was okay with his own needs that he had. And so it's what he was saying is that there always seems to be an expectation that you need to drop your needs to care for somebody else, but you're not able to drop your needs. Your needs are your needs. And so when you are working with, so in this case, somebody who is mentally unwell, is the carer able to look after that person? What support does the carer need? Because it could be that where the partner is really unwell, that might be conflicting with some of the what is coming out of that being mentally unwell might be conflicting with the needs of the autistic carer. So you really need to check that the carer is also okay with what they're dealing with. And you also get this thing within families where you feel that you have to look after somebody, and that if you say I'm not coping, that you've failed and you failed the person that you love. So it's making sure that they feel that they're not failing, but actually still looking at what those support needs are and what adjustments can be given to them within the care that they are getting. So it could be with this that the reasonable adjustment here could be that you need to check in with John a bit more often, and maybe for the next few days that you will be in touch with him over the next few days, just making sure that he is coping with looking after the person that he's caring for. But it's just not making assumptions. And one size doesn't fit all. Everybody who's autistic is different. Their needs are different. And so in this scenario here about COVID, for one person, meant that telephone calls made it more challenging. For another one, lockdown made things very easier. So it depends on the person as to what their needs are, and just don't assume because you've done a reasonable adjustment for one person that you're going to do the same reasonable adjustment for the next person that you meet. It could be the really wrong thing to do, and actually they don't need any reasonable adjustments in that area whatsoever, but actually it's something else. So one size really does not fit all. You can get health passports, and each area, I was looking across the east of England at some of the different health passports that were there. The one on the right here might be one that could be used for people who might have a learning disability as well, might need more care. The one on the left is one that the National Autistic Society did quite a few years ago now. Or they might have one that's quite different themselves, but it's just needing to know what the healthcare needs, not just of the patient that's going in, and that might be that they've got one of these for the cared for person, but that actually the carer, that they have listed their needs on here as well. And if somebody has got a health passport, really do take notice of it, because they've been able to fill this in when they've been in a very calm state of mind, where they've been able to list all their needs, things where they need help with, which is where the reasonable adjustments come in, and things that they're actually okay with. So really do take time out to look at that, because it can prevent an awful lot of bad things, negative things happening as you go forward. So what happens when reasonable adjustments are made? So I was able to change my appointment to suit me. The doctors have an app that allows you a space to ask a question up to 48 hours after the appointment. This is really helpful to allow time for me to process and allow questions that I wouldn't necessarily ask in front of him, or it could be ask questions that they'd forgotten about because of their anxiety while they were there, or that they hadn't had time to process information, and therefore follow-up questions came afterwards. Because the staff at my GP surgery know me, my appointment times are always kept to time, even if other people's can't. And so it's just knowing that for that person, they really do need to know that if they're coming for an appointment at 3 o'clock, it's going to happen at 3 o'clock. And so again, a little reasonable adjustment. Post having baby, they recognised Hannah was feeling overwhelmed and took her into a side room with really good communication. And that made the difference of somebody being less stressed, being able to look after the baby easier than having to be in a ward with other people where everything that was going on was distracting her so much she wasn't able to concentrate. And, you know, having a baby and all the things you've got to learn and the things that you've got to do, she wasn't able to concentrate on that whatsoever. So just by being able to be put into a side room was a reasonable adjustment for her. And then this just a couple of things from an autistic carer who I was hoping to show a video of today, but the video was a bit too long, so we've just taken a couple of excerpts from it. If I'm going to planned appointments, I have a prompt list in case I go mute. And so for this person, when her anxiety raises up really high, she switches off. Her brain just goes, and so she is just sat there and is not able to say anything. So she has recognised that this is what happens. So she writes down a list of things, and then she is able to hand them over to somebody to who she is seeing so that they can get on with it. So it's something the GP and I can start from, even if I can't speak. I give him the list, and by him just reading the top line helps her to come out of that block that's made her mute, and then she can start to move on with that. So that's great understanding from the GP to her. And he writes down on my notes, our plans, I have something when I walk out to refer back to, and that helps her a lot. So it's quite a simple, reasonable adjustment. And it also probably could help the doctor as well, that by writing it down, it's sort of, you know, he'll have to make notes for himself about the case. So it might not be duplicating work either. My son is a regular of both day and stay visits to a hospital. They are aware of my autism. They always try to put us in the exact same bay when we stay overnight each time we come. This reduces my sensory stress as I already know the layout and where to find basic things for my son's needs. It is away from the busier section, so it is quieter and the lights are easier for us to control. They don't try to open up our area or change the lights without warning. So again, where a reasonable adjustment has been put into place, which has really helped and changed how they view some of the visits that they're doing. So that is us coming to an end of this session. The evaluation link will be getting sent out to you through a SurveyMonkey link. For those of you who have been on all three of these sessions, for you to feedback on there, but also there'll be some tick boxes as to whether you've just been on one or not. What we would like you to do with the SurveyMonkey, obviously, please do answer everything as honestly as you can do, and help us to know what we could do differently next time. But we would also like you to give us some ideas of things where you found these 1 hour lunch and learn sessions helpful, of things that you might like to be addressed in future. And that can help with planning from our side.